LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 13th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, slightly delayed for reasons I'll explain in just a moment. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 9 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all today. I'm not going to take any of the Bill Maher comedy because of the tragedy in Charlottesville over the weekend, which happened after Bill Maher's show, and so that's the only topic I'm going to cover is Trump's failure to lead by failing to call out the white supremacist, neo-Nazi, KKK, alt-right groups that were the cause of the violence and apparently the cause of a death in Charlottesville over the weekend. And I'll have several clips showing how Trump did not really lead the country in the way he should have, and discussion of that, and some Trump administration officials trying to clean it up, and some Republicans calling him out on it, and one Democrat, the mayor of Charlottesville. My show is somewhat delayed. I had several things that delayed me yesterday, including a free speech issue, an ACLU free speech issue that came out of this whole Charlottesville tragedy. You can see on my LiberalViewer, this is facebook.com/LiberalViewer, I posted publicly a short defense of the ACLU position that in favor of free speech rights to hold the protest in the location of the statue, which you'll see in the comments. I also talk about that a little bit. Some people have asked me to make a whole video about that. I may do that if time permits later in the week, but like I said, I want to cover for my Sunday live clip roundup that's been delayed the coverage of Trump's failure to lead. And while I'm not going to have actual political comedy, I have some sort of, I guess it's political dark comedy, showing how the one place where Trump's failure to lead was totally switched around, and they actually blamed the governor of Virginia for calling out the one side responsible, and the many sides thing was more balanced of Trump over on Fox and Friends Sunday. And there's this one host, Peter Hegseth, I think his name is, who seems to be almost, even though he says during the show, I don't think in this clip that he's not being an apologist for the white supremacists. He does say in this clip, no one's for the KKK or Nazis, but they have some good ideas, as you'll see him say, along with Abby Huntsman, who speaks briefly in the clip I wanted to start the show with today here.
Unfortunately, on the other side of the aisle, you saw a lot of continue to divide, saying there's just one side, only one side's at fault. Emblematic of that, Governor Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, had some words pointed in one direction. Take a listen.
I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot. You came here today to hurt people. And you did hurt people. But my message is clear. We are stronger than you.
Joe Biden following up with a tweet, doubling down on that perspective as well. He said this, there is only one side, hashtag Charlottesville. I don't think this morning is the point just necessarily to point fingers, other than that James Alex Fields, who drove his car into innocent people, which would never and should never be acceptable. This is a country of free speech, which should never be shut down, as hateful as it may be in this particular case. But you know what? We should also look at what the left has done in this country, the racial balkanization. We divide each other by race. They don't want to make it better. They oftentimes want to keep us divided. And I think a lot of these I don't know if we can put the image up, but these young guys with the tiki torches, did you see that?
Right.
It's a chilling image because these are, their faces are not covered. They're walking down the street. I mean, it conjures up images of the KKK, which no one supports. But they also, if you step back from that, again, this is not to apologize for what they're saying, but they feel like they're the new second-class citizens, like they have white privilege, that they're racial double standards, affirmative action policies, open borders immigration, erasing history like the Robert E. Lee statute. That doesn't mean you're pro-Confederate or pro-KKK or pro-white supremacism. It's just saying, hey, we've got another side of the argument. They do themselves a big disjustice by carrying tiki torches and conjuring up that they're the KKK. So this is a conversation that's going on, whether the mainstream media wants to have it or not, this feeling that our country is dividing even further as opposed to uniting around what really matters, which is Americanism. America, in that our racial preferences, our racial identity is not what should define us. What should define us is that we are Americans who love our country.
Well, exactly, and that is the message I think we need to hear today. The problem, though, and I think you're hitting at this, is we have got groups in this country that wake up hating people, right? We don't need to describe or identify every single one of those groups, but it exists today. And to both of your points, it may only get worse.
I also don't describe myself as a white male. That's not my identifying factor. My identifying factor is I'm an American who loves this country. And the more we put people in groups and in buckets, you're transgendered, you're a woman, you're a wise Latina, you're an African American, the more we divide each other, rather than saying we have a constitution and a declaration that bestow rights on us by God, that's what should unite us. That's what President Trump is talking about. Yet they say when he talks about God and country that he's talking in code. He's using a dog whistle to white supremacists. That's never what he's been about. It's been about this country and making it strong and free and opportunity for everyone. The more we divide each other, the worse it's going to get. Yeah. It's a tough conversation. Listen, no one wants to have it.
No one wants to have it.
The reality is it's an underlying sense that a lot of people have that our country is changing, and it doesn't have to be about race and being white. You know, that to me is where you lose it.
Well, we're going to be talking about this all morning long with a lot of great.
And they talked about it all morning long. And Peter Hegseth there, he made his point over and over again that, they say we have white privilege and, there's really some justification for the white supremacist neo-Nazi KKK marchers. And, of course, they criticized the Democrats for actually calling out one side as being responsible for the hate and the bigotry. But even Fox News Sunday didn't do that. I'm going to show kind of a roundup of the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. I already showed that Fox and Friends Sunday clip. But before I get to all that, I first want to show the full statement that Donald Trump made on Saturday that they were defending there on Fox News or on Fox and Friends, and that you'll see a lot of people criticizing in the subsequent clips I'm going to show. But I wanted to show it to you. The only editing I wanted to show what the code words were. I don't think it's a very difficult code to break, especially the first part that Peter Hegseth was complaining that liberals, or it's even Republicans who were criticizing Trump for this. One is the on many sides. That's where the blame or the hatred and the bigotry and the violence is on many sides. You'll see he repeats that twice, and I've put text up to mark it. And then near the end, he also talks about cherishing our history, which, given that the basis for this whole controversy is whether they should take down this Robert E. Lee statue, seems to be kind of siding with the white supremacist KKK neo-Nazi protesters. But you can let me know what you think as we watch. This is a public domain clip from the White House website. You can watch the whole thing, including the signing of the VA bill, down at a link I put in the video description. But here's the part about Charlottesville from Donald Trump yesterday, or actually from Saturday over here.
We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society, and no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents and have a good time. I just got off the phone with the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, and we agreed that the hate and the division must stop, and must stop right now. We have to come together as Americans with love for our nation and true affection, really, and I say this so strongly, true affection for each other. Our country is doing very well in so many ways. We have record, just absolute record employment. We have unemployment, the lowest it's been in almost 17 years. We have companies pouring into our country, Foxconn and car companies and so many others. They're coming back to our country. We're renegotiating trade deals to make them great for our country and great for the American worker. We have so many incredible things happening in our country. So when I watch Charlottesville, to me it's very, very sad. I want to salute the great work of the state and local police in Virginia, incredible people, law enforcement, incredible people, and also the National Guard. They've really been working smart and working hard. They've been doing a terrific job. Federal authorities are also providing tremendous support to the governor. He thanked me for that. And we are here to provide whatever other assistance is needed. We are ready, willing, and able. Above all else, we must remember this truth. No matter our color, creed, religion, or political party, we are all Americans first. We love our country. We love our God. We love our flag. We're proud of our country. We're proud of who we are. So we want to get the situation straightened out in Charlottesville, and we want to study it. And we want to see what we're doing wrong as a country where things like this can happen. My administration is restoring the sacred bonds of loyalty between this nation and its citizens. But our citizens must also restore the bonds of trust and loyalty between one another. We must love each other, respect each other, and cherish our history and our future together. So important. We have to respect each other. Ideally, we have to love each other.
And that's basically the full statement that Donald Trump made in response to the Charlottesville violence. You saw there that I highlighted the part where he said on many sides, which, you know, false equivalency and blaming both sides for violence that comes from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, the KKK, the alt-right. And then at the end, I also highlighted that cherish our history part, which is a somewhat bizarre thing to say in a situation where there are white supremacists and the KKK protesting to keep Confederate symbols in a park. That, you know, that's, they say it's historical, although it was put there in the 1920s as, you know, a way to tell African Americans in the community that they were not first-class citizens, at least in my estimation of the history of what I've seen of the statue in Charlottesville. And a lot of the Confederate statues around the South were put in the 20th century, not in the 19th century. So that was Trump's statement, and the best roundup or the best summary of the criticism of Trump's very tepid response to the Charlottesville violence. The best summary, I think, as usual, came from NBC's Meet the Press. Here's Chuck Todd in a little under 2 minutes, rounding up even Republicans attacking Trump for not calling out the white supremacist and Nazis and KKK and alt-right by name after criticizing Obama all those times for not calling, radical Islamic terrorists, and I'll talk about that more a little later. But here's the NBC summary of the response to Trump from yesterday morning here.
Over just the past several weeks, Mr. Trump has condemned his party's leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, members of Congress, and his own Attorney General. The president's response to white supremacists in Charlottesville was tepid by comparison.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Asked to clarify, an unnamed White House official told NBC News the president was condemning hatred, bigotry, and violence from all sources and all sides. There was violence between protesters and counter-protesters today.
Mr. President, do you want the support of these white nationalist groups who say they support you, Mr. President?
Mr. President,
have you denounced them strongly enough?
As some of the white nationalists cited Trump's victory as validation for their beliefs.
we are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump.
Mr. Trump chose not to condemn them. Many elected Republicans seem to agree the president did not go far enough. Colorado Senator Cory Gardner, who was in charge of getting Senate Republicans elected in 2018, tweeted, "Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism." Florida's Marco Rubio, quote, "Very important for the nation to hear POTUS describe events in Charlottesville for what they are, a terror attack by white supremacists." Utah Senator Orrin Hatch tweeted, "My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home." And Texas Senator Ted Cruz, quote, "The Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists are repulsive and evil, and all of us have a moral obligation to speak out." And joining me now is the mayor.
So, yeah, there you see it was pretty much a softball to anyone, come out and say that Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists are bad. That is such an easy win for any politician because there's such a small sliver, one would hope, of the American people who support, or at least explicitly support, Nazis and the KKK and white supremacists. I think there may be a larger segment like our friend, the Fox and Friends host, Peter Hegseth, who, think they have some good ideas, even though I'm not, Nazi, white supremacist, KKK, but it's my white privilege to feel like I'm the victim here. That's basically my summary of that. But it would have been really easy for Trump to say what all those, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, why are they saying that? Some say they're positioning themselves for running in 2020 against Donald Trump or for some future presidential campaign. I think both Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz will run for president again, so that might be what that's all about. But that just shows how politically easy it is to come out against Nazis and the KKK. And as to why it is Trump didn't, well, I'll talk about that a little more after I show this next clip, which is the longest clip. It's a little over 9 minutes long, but you'll see I've edited I edited this clip in several places. I took it down from 14 minutes long. This is Jake Tapper versus the White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, and it took him 14 minutes to finally say, I condemn white supremacists, I condemn neo-Nazis, I condemn the KKK. And it's, you'll see by the end of this clip, Jake Tapper saying, I don't want to belabor the point, which after 14 minutes is not something you should be allowed to say, which actually Tom Bossert calls him on that. But you'll see this is excruciatingly painful, and I wanted you to see how hard it is to get this condemnation out of people from the Trump administration. Some of them, I'll show H.R. McMaster, who is obviously a much more reasonable person, the National Security Advisor. He much more quickly, within less than a minute, does what it takes more than 14 minutes for Tom Bossert to do. And you'll see near the end, he's actually like rolling his eyes at Jake Tapper. And I think Jake Tapper does a really good job at following up, finally gets the answer in 14 minutes, which I've edited down to a slightly less excruciating 9 minutes, 15 seconds for you all, which I will discuss with you after we watch that pretty long clip together over here.
A lengthy list of Republican officials took to Twitter to beseech President Trump to specifically call out the white supremacists. For these Republicans, it's clear the president's statement yesterday was far too vague. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, "It's very many sides." Republican officials, as you heard just there, did not think that was sufficient. On behalf of the White House, for what they are, a terror attack by white supremacists. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, a friend of this country.
I, for one, was with the president yesterday and proud of the fact that he stood up and calmly looked into the camera and condemned this violence and bigotry in all its forms. This racial intolerance and racial bigotry cannot be condoned.
Well, you say that the president was clear in condemning this bigotry, but listen to this. This is from an infamous neo-Nazi website. Quote, "Trump comments were good. He said he loves us all. Also refused to answer a question about white nationalists supporting him. No condemnation at all. When asked to condemn, he just walked out of the room. Really, really good. God bless him," unquote. Mr. Bossert, that's a neo-Nazi website celebrating how equivocal and vague the President of the United States was. Are you willing to at least concede that President Trump was not clear enough in specifically condemning white supremacy?
No, you know, the words of the ignorant bear little with me and should bear less with you in the media. Unfortunately, they don't. And what I would say is that the president not only condemned the violence and stood up at a time and a moment when calm was necessary and didn't dignify the names of these groups and people, but rather addressed the fundamental issue. And so, Jake, what you need to focus on is the rest of his statement. The president didn't just call for human beings to respect one another, which is his pragmatist core, fundamental bare minimum, but he called for ideally Americans to love one another.
Well, it's not really what I think. It's about what Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Cory Gardner and Senator Orrin Hatch and Senator Ted Cruz and Governor Chris Christie and Congressman Pete Sessions and on and on and on, what they think.
Yeah,
they have gone public, making it very clear that they don't think President Trump was specific enough in condemning white supremacists. So it doesn't really have any effect or bearing what I think. I'm asking you, all these Republican officials who want the president to succeed are saying this didn't go far enough.
Yeah, I think you should give yourself more credit, because what you do think does invade and pervade the things you say on air and the things that you cover. I also think that what you believe and what you think is important, as the president does as well. He believes all Americans should have a conversation and an open debate on this matter. This is unacceptable. This violence cannot stand. He made that clear yesterday. I think that the other statements that you've highlighted, Governor Christie and the other leaders in the party that you've quoted, have all said things similar. They've all denounced the violence, denounced the groups that showed up. And by the way, we had protesters and counter-protesters that showed up yesterday. This is the very challenge that confronted the mayor and his police officials and fire officials, the National Guard officials that were called out. These weren't people that showed up to protest a statue. I'm sure there were good people in the group that had various opinions on the removal or maintenance of the statue. But what they found when they showed up were groups from outside that showed up on both sides, looking for trouble, dressed in riot gear. For a moment.
You just decried both sides. Here we have a situation, Mr. Bossert, where neo-Nazis, the Klan, alt-right, and others went to Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting anti-Semitic, anti-African-American, and other racist slogans, provoking the people of Charlottesville, Virginia, making them feel intimidated. Yes, violence did break out. One person was killed by one of these alt-right Klan Nazi protesters, and you just decried both sides of this, and this is the issue.
No, I didn't, and you're making this issue a little bit distorted. So what I would decry is the individual that committed murder yesterday. These groups showed up spewing hate. These groups showed up looking for violence.
What groups?
I think it's just important for people to understand.
What groups are you referring to?
Of course, the groups that showed up. Well, I refer to the groups that clashed yesterday. I think it was pretty graphically evident.
Are you talking about the neo-Nazis, or are you talking about the counter-protesters?
One of the things that I think the mayor will make clear to you, and probably stated earlier on your program, I know he and I talked about it this morning, was the difficulty he had in planning for this event. So, I don't assign blame or assuage blame or try to press blame to different groups, Jake. The point I'm trying to make here is that what we saw yesterday was an unacceptable planned demonstration of violence. And what I would say is, with respect to murder, and I'm a little bit indignant over the way you phrased that, apologies if I took it the wrong way, but I place the blame most squarely and most directly on the murderer that's sitting, alleged murderer, if that's the driver of the vehicle. It's no question in my mind the driver of that vehicle acted with intent. If that is the driver of that vehicle, he is rightly accused of being a murderer.
I guess one of the issues that is being voiced by the Chris Christie's, Marco Rubio's, Orrin Hatches of the world is that there seems to be a moral equivalence being made here between the counter-protesters and the neo-Nazis, Klan members, and all-right supporters. And there's this additional context, of course, to all of it. The president refusing to condemn white supremacists and David Duke on this very show a year and a half ago, his retweeting white supremacists, a top White House advisor, Steve Bannon, who said his former employer Breitbart was the platform of the alt-right. And take a listen to White House advisor Sebastian Gorka just this week telling Breitbart Radio that radical Islamic extremists are the only problem while white supremacists are not. Take a listen.
It's this constant, oh, it's the white man, it's the white supremacist, that's the problem. No, it isn't.
Surely it's not the position of the Trump White House that white supremacists are not a problem.
Certainly not. I'm not certain the context of that Gorka quote. I can tell you that where I spend a great deal of my time and a great deal, unfortunately, of the American taxpayers' resources is combating a global jihadi terrorist problem. But I will double down and be very clear and direct with you for a fourth time that the violence we saw yesterday is unacceptable. There is no equivocation in my mind, in my voice, or in my eyes. And so if I haven't made it clear enough to you, I'll answer it a fifth time. And I'll do it all day. But I think what's important for you and your viewers to understand is that the president feels that way as well. And I think what you're trying to get at and what you're trying to drive here is why the president didn't say something different or say something more. I believe that the subset of all the groups and all the people who might justify their insanity or violence are covered by the president's clear denunciation yesterday. And I think declaring racial bigotry unacceptable was a very smart and calming thing for the president to do. It was a leadership decision that he took.
I guess the point is, and this is again a point being made by Republican officials like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Cory Gardner, and others, is that when you just condemn groups as opposed to specifically white supremacists, Nazis, Klan members, it creates this vagueness that, as I read to you in that neo-Nazi website quote, allows neo-Nazis to think he's not condemning us, he's condemning anybody that was violent. And that's the problem. And you, on the show today, have said that you condemn groups and condemn actions and condemn bigotry, but I haven't heard you say, I condemn white supremacists, I condemn neo-Nazis, I condemn the alt-right. I haven't heard that, and I think a lot of people were upset, a lot of Republican officials, they didn't hear it from President Trump. But I don't want to belabor this point because...
Okay, well,
go ahead.
I think you've belabored it, so let me say I condemn white supremacists and racists and white Nazi groups and all the other groups that espouse this kind of hatred and exclusion. I can't be clearer.
Okay, let's turn to North Korea.
So you saw the rolling of the eyes there. You saw that Tom Bossert, the White House Homeland Security advisor, kept claiming he'd answered the question, but he did blame both sides again, and then claimed he didn't blame both sides. And the one thing I would say that Jake Tapper said that wasn't true was when he said, I don't want to belabor the point, because that's like almost 14 minutes in, and so Tom Bossert had a point there. But why it took so long, I don't know Tom Bossert's background, but why it took so long for him to say, okay, that's what you want, I will condemn Nazis, I will condemn the KKK, or I'm sorry, I think he said white Nazis, but I didn't know there were non-white Nazis. But have Nazis instituted some sort of diversity program of which I'm not aware? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I want to contrast Tom Bossert's excruciating 14-minute interchange with Jake Tapper there that I edited down to about 9 minutes 15 seconds for fair use purposes. Because, for fair use you have to use the minimum amount of the clip or that you can to make your point. And I think I took out as much superfluous stuff as I could there. You'll see here, though, that the White House National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, over on NBC's Meet the Press, talking to Chuck Todd, gets to the same answer in 59 seconds. This clip is 59 seconds, so less than a minute compared to 14 minutes that I edited down to 9 minutes in that last clip. And I'll discuss that with you after we watch this clip together here.
But there, I got to ask about Charlottesville, and perhaps you've had a chance to talk with the president either this morning or last night. Why didn't he single out the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists?
Well, when he condemned bigotry and hatred on all sides, that includes white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And I think it's clear, I know it's clear in his mind, and it ought to be clear to all Americans. We cannot tolerate, obviously, that bigotry, that hatred that is rooted in ignorance of what America stands for, what America is.
Should we expect to hear, instead of from you, from him, some of those words?
I'm sure you will hear from the president more about this. I mean, this is important to the president to bring all Americans together. He said what we all have to be is all of us have to be Americans first, and that's our common identity as Americans, grounded in our commitment to liberty, to human rights, to equal rights, and to tolerance over this kind of hatred and bigotry.
When you watched all this yesterday, what was your reaction?
So you see, it was not that difficult for H.R. McMaster, and it wasn't that difficult for him to call it domestic terrorism over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is a little over a minute responding to that question from George Stephanopoulos yesterday morning here.
Do you consider that car attack in Charlottesville yesterday an act of domestic terrorism?
I certainly think any time that you commit an attack against people to incite fear, it is terrorism. It meets the definition of terrorism. But what this is, what you see here, is you see someone who is a criminal, who is committing a criminal act against fellow Americans, a criminal act that may have been motivated, and we'll see what's turned up in this investigation by this hatred and bigotry, which I mentioned we have to extinguish in our nation. And we have to do that by asking ourselves, what are we teaching our children around the dinner table? What are we teaching our children in school? And we ought to be teaching them about what makes America exceptional. And that's our commitment to the rights of every individual, liberty, freedom, respect for each other, regardless of race, religion, and so forth. So this is, I think, what we ought to all ask ourselves. And as we send our condolences out to the victims of this terrible violence, we ought to ask ourselves, what more can all of us do?
We certainly should. General McMaster, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, George.
So, again, that was a much better answer from the White House National Security Advisor than from the president. I don't know, the president today may make a better statement. That H.R. McMaster in the previous clip said that he thought the president would address this again, and maybe he'll actually come out and finally condemn specifically the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis and the KKK. But I think actually all the questioners, or both questioners of H.R. McMaster, kind of missed an opportunity to ask him about the contrast between his willingness to call this domestic terrorism and white supremacism and Nazis, etc., but why he's counseled Trump to do what Barack Obama did and not call so-called radical Islamic terrorism. And the reason Obama didn't do it is because he didn't want to alienate our moderate Muslim allies. And the reason that Donald Trump may be not calling out the KKK and the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists and the alt-right is because he also does not want to alienate his, I don't know, his supremacist, his like alt-right allies. Or, I mean, that is the question that they didn't really ask H.R. McMaster. And no one really completed that circle where they talked about why Obama didn't say radical Islamic terrorism to avoid alienating allies, and that might be why Trump isn't doing it. I mean, people talked about Trump not wanting to alienate this part of his base, and you'll see that in the next couple clips. And they even talked about how he criticized Obama for not calling radical Islamic terrorism, but nobody added that like extra little part as to why Obama didn't say radical Islamic terrorism, and how it might be the same reason Donald Trump won't. And I'm going to show two Republican senators dealing with those issues. First, Cory Gardner from Colorado, and then Senator Lindsey Graham, one of our favorites. But Cory Gardner from Colorado is very willing to call out Donald Trump for not being more specific, but not so much answer the question why is it he doesn't want to alienate his base, or what's the reason for it. Talking to Jake Tapper, this is not quite as dogged as the pursuit of Tom Bossert. This is about 3 minutes 40 seconds, a little under that, not the 9 minutes I showed before, but this is the second and final clip from CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper this morning here.
We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
That was former Klan leader David Duke yesterday morning in Charlottesville, Virginia. A number of Republicans have condemned President Trump yesterday for not calling out white supremacists and members of the Klan who have this mindset. Among the first on Twitter was Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado, who joins me now. Senator, thanks for joining us. You had some tough words for President Trump on Saturday. Let me show our viewers what you tweeted. Quote, "Mr. President, we must call evil by its name. There were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism." You heard Tom Bossert, the Homeland Security Advisor of the President, arguing that the President did condemn it. What do you think?
Well, this is not a time for vagaries. This isn't a time for innuendo or to allow room to be read between the lines. This is a time to lay blame on bigotry, to lay blame on white supremacists, on white nationalism, and on hatred. And that needs to be said. This president has done an incredible job of naming terrorism around the globe as evil, radical Islamic terrorism, whether it's in Europe or the Middle East. He has said and called it out time and time again, and this president needs to do exactly that today. Call this white supremacism, this white nationalism evil, and let the country hear it, let the world hear it. It's something that needs to come from the Oval Office, and this White House needs to do it today.
Some critics say that President Trump doesn't do this because he might believe that these white supremacists are a part of his base, not obviously his entire base, but a part of his base, and he doesn't want to risk alienating them. What do you think? Why is the reason? What is the reason that he won't condemn them, call them domestic terrorists, call them white supremacists?
White nationalists, white supremacists, they're not a part of anybody's base. They're not a part of this country. They're a part of hatred. They're a part of bigotry. They're a part of evil, and we need to stand up to that. And so whether it's the President of the United States, a senator from any of our great 50 states around the country, or our city councils and mayors, school teachers, call it for what it is. It's hatred. It's bigotry. We don't want them in our base. They shouldn't be in a base. They shouldn't be claimed as part of a base, and it has to be made crystal clear.
Yeah, but why won't the president do that the way you just did?
Yeah. Well, again, I encourage the president to do that. This president has done so when people have driven trucks through crowds in Europe. He's called it radical Islamic terrorism. He should use this opportunity today to say this is terrorism, this is domestic terrorism, this is white nationalism, and it has to stop. And I encourage the president to do so. He has a chance to do that. The healing power of the White House, the ability to lead of the president of the United States, it needs to be seen today. Yes, he condemned bigotry and hatred, but we need to name evil and call evil and name it. And in this case, it is clearly bigotry, hatred, racism, and the white nationalists who led to death and murder in Charlottesville.
With respect, Senator, you're not answering my question. Why do you think he doesn't do it? I mean, is it sending a dog whistle? I mean, you heard me quote the neo-Nazi website to Tom Bossert earlier. There are neo-Nazis out there who say, oh, great, he wasn't condemning us specifically. Do you think that was the intention of the president?
I think the president needs to step up today and say what it is and call it for what it is. It's evil, it's white nationalism, it's bigotry, and it's unacceptable. And if he doesn't do that, then we can continue to answer the question of why. But I believe he has a chance to do that today. Ivanka called this white nationalism. She called it out today. The president needs to do so as well.
You were on the front end of Republican criticism of this, yes.
So there you see a Republican senator being much more specific about white nationalists, white supremacists, Nazis, the KKK, etc., and calling out Donald Trump for not being more specific, but he's not willing to go the extra step and explain why it is that Donald Trump won't call them out. You know, is it this part of his base, as Jake Tapper was suggesting? And you saw Cory Gardner even referred to the failure of Obama to say radical Islamic terrorism, and the only missing piece, like I said before I showed the clip, is why it is Obama wouldn't say that, because he didn't want to alienate moderate Muslim allies. And that seems to be the same reason that Trump won't call out the white supremacists. I don't know, maybe around the Donald Trump is supposed to be having a press availability right around the time I'm doing this live stream, so maybe he will be more specific. I saw Joy-Ann Reid on NBC's Meet the Press and also on her own show yesterday saying that she didn't think that Trump would be able to come out and specifically denounce these groups until he fired, because Trump is reading his statements. She was saying that he has to fire the people who are writing those statements, like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and the other alt-right Breitbart hires into the Trump administration. I don't have that clip, but I think that's an important analysis to remember. But I'm going to show one more Republican senator, as I promised, before the final clip, which is the Democratic mayor of Charlottesville, Mike Signer, who I think really talks about how Donald Trump has some more long-term responsibility for this white supremacist, neo-Nazi, KKK rise of acceptability, people doing out in public. But first I want to show Lindsey Graham. Also, this is a little bit shorter than the clip from CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper. This is from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, where they did, they spent more time on North Korea than the other shows. That's the only bias I would claim, because they didn't spend as much time criticizing Donald Trump for not calling out by name the white supremacists, etc. But they did cover that, and both in their news summary at the beginning, and then you'll see in the questioning of Lindsey Graham by Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday. Although Lindsey Graham also will never say why it is Trump won't criticize his so-called base of white supremacists. All Lindsey Graham will say is, well, they know that I'm not their friend, and so Donald Trump should let them know that he's not their friend too, in this 2.5-minute clip over here.
Senator, let's start before we get to North Korea with that white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, Saturday. Thousands of people, including neo-Nazis and members of the Klan, marching to, quote, take America back. Your reaction?
Well, it's an act of domestic terrorism, and the groups you just mentioned are hate-filled groups. They're enemies of freedom. I'd like to see a task force of the Department of Justice and Homeland Security to look at the size and scope of these groups, report back to Congress to see if we need to do more in terms of suppressing them. But when it comes to President Trump, I'm with Cory Gardner. He missed an opportunity to be very explicit here. These groups seem to believe they have a friend in Donald Trump in the White House. I don't know why they believe that, but they don't see me as a friend in the Senate, and I was their friend.
Well, let's talk about that, because as you point out, the president is being criticized for falling the white supremacists, the white nationalists. Here he is yesterday.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Why do you think the president said that, on many sides, and never referred to white supremacists, never referred to neo-Nazis? And do you think, you say that some of them feel that they have a friend in the White House, do you think that this president, who has no problem talking tough to a lot of people, is somehow not willing to take on that, maybe a small part, but that part of his base?
Let me just say this. I'm glad they don't like me. I'm glad they believe that Lindsey Graham is not their friend. It would bother me a lot if they did. So if I were president of the United States and these people showed sympathy toward me and my agenda, it would bother me, and I would urge the president to dissuade them of the fact that he's sympathetic to their cause, because their cause is hate. It is un-American. They are domestic terrorists, and we need more from our president on this issue.
And do you have any thought as to why he didn't do that yesterday?
I like President Trump. It's up to him to correct the record here, not me. I know they don't consider me as their friend, and I think the president can be clear when he wants to be. He needs to be clear here.
Let's turn to North Korea. How close are we to a military?
So Lindsey Graham has obviously unfriended the white supremacists on Facebook or something, because he's making very clear that he is not their friend, and they know he's not his friend, that he's not their friend. But I think he also didn't answer the same question Cory Gardner wouldn't answer, which is why it is that Donald Trump won't denounce these groups by name, these white supremacists, neo-Nazi, KKK, alt-right groups by name. Maybe he'll do it today, but it's not just his failure to do it over the weekend. There's also a greater responsibility he should talk about, And that, I don't think, even if he does come out with some forced statement, actually calling these groups out by name, which I'm not even sure he'll do that, but even if he does that, I know he's not going to apologize for the way he has really exacerbated the racial tensions and even lifted up these groups by going to like the basest, coarsest parts of our electorate in order to get some of the dog whistles that I showed at the beginning. And anyway, the last clip I want to show is from the mayor of Charlottesville, a Democrat who definitely, and he was on a couple different shows, and he definitely called out Donald Trump for his long-term contribution to this problem. This is Mike Signer. This is from CBS's Face the Nation, talking to John Dickerson. He did ask him some more, John Dickerson did ask some tougher questions. This is a softball question at the end, but if you're going to give anyone a softball question, I think it would be the mayor of a town that just went through what Charlottesville went through this weekend. And, it's what do you think of what Donald Trump said? And he does talk a little bit about the more long-term responsibility of Trump in this clip.
The president said that he wanted to know what was going on in Charlottesville and that we want to see what we're doing wrong as a country, he said. What's your answer to that?
I don't want to make this too much about Donald Trump. We have a lot of grieving, a lot of work to do as a city and as a country, but he should look in the mirror. I mean, he made a choice in his presidential campaign, the folks around with him, to go right to the gutter, to play on our worst prejudices. And I think you were seeing a direct line from what happened here this weekend to those choices. He has the opportunity, as do we all, to have a fresh beginning. Like I've said, our democracy has been through much worse than this, but that requires us to rise to the occasion. We're going to do that work here. We're going to work on civility and listening, deliberation, First Amendment, religious toleration, pluralism. I mean, those are ideas that are what got us here now, but we've just seen this tide of coarseness, cynicism, bullying, and, a festival of going to the absolute worst elements that previously had been hidden. Now they've been invited out into the daylight. I mean, a lot of people are coming here this weekend saying this will be a shot heard around the world. This will be the alt-right's moment. This will be alt-right 2.0. All that kind of rhetoric. And I think they're getting okays for that because they were invited into basically a presidential campaign. That has to stop, and it can stop now. What I did not hear in the president's statement yesterday, as well-intentioned as it may have been, is I didn't hear the words white supremacy. And I think that it's important to call this for what it is and to say, okay, this show has run its course. This shark has been jumped. Let's move on.
All right, Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks.
So I'm seeing in the comment sections that Donald Trump actually has made a more specific statement. I'll have to watch that after the show as I'm broadcasting. But I doubt that he apologized for that more long-term invitation to white supremacists into his campaign, as the mayor of Charlottesville said, and even into his administration, that Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and some of the other people who have been taken into the Trump administration from the alt-right, from Breitbart, etc., that they're still there. I assume that Donald Trump did not announce he's firing those people, so I'll have to figure out, or I'll have to check out what Donald Trump actually said. But before I finish, that was the last clip. I've been reading the live comments along the way, and I saw this one from L. Middleman. Asking about the ACLU support for the free speech rights for the protests that led to this violence. As I said at the beginning of the show, I have posted publicly about that briefly on my Facebook page, facebook.com/LiberalViewer. You can see another additional defense of the ACLU of Virginia in the comment section. This post has actually gotten quite a few likes, including one from the ACLU of Virginia liked my Facebook post there, so that was something that was a nice moment over the weekend. Like I said at the beginning, I may do an additional video about the free speech issue. It I mean, I'd like to talk about it. I doubt it'll be monetized. I don't even know if this video is going to end up monetized, because YouTube has a history of when there are these events involving violence, videos talking about them don't get monetized. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about it like I did in this video. And if I have time and circumstances allow, I hope to make an additional video about the free speech issues that the ACLU was defending in Charlottesville. I'm not going to drop my support. I still support the ACLU free speech, the defense of free speech. In this case, it was defense of protesters' rights to protest near or at the subject that they're protesting about, the Robert E. Lee statue in Emancipation Park. That's what they were protesting about, and the city at the last moment wanted to move them to this other park that had nothing to do with the subject of the protest, and the city did not beforehand have evidence to present in court of violence. The threat of violence. They claimed a threat of violence, but they didn't present the sufficient evidence in court that a judge would need to stop a free speech demonstration or protest. And just looking back and seeing that violence occurred doesn't mean that what the court decided was wrong, or that the ACLU position was wrong. But like I said, I may make an additional video if I have time and circumstances permit. But I appreciate all the people who showed up for my live show. I don't know if the live stream cut out at one point. I may have to upload the recorded version. But I hope to make my video earlier next week. And in fact, I think I have to make it earlier next week, because I have an event I'm going to at like 8 p.m. next Sunday. So I should be all done before 8 p.m., before 7 p.m. Pacific time next Sunday. I'm sorry this was so delayed for people who were waiting for the live stream last night. And I appreciate all of you who showed up to join me. And until I make another edited, produced video or a live stream on this free speech ACLU issue that came out of the Charlottesville tragedy, or until next Sunday when I do my next live stream, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.